Arthur Vance navigated the city's arteries with a practiced, weary competence. The sleek leather of his steering wheel felt cool and impersonal beneath his hands, a familiar sensation in a life constructed from such things. Outside, a torrential November rain lashed against the windows of his sedan, blurring the world into a watercolor of gray and neon. In the back seat, his 7-year-old daughter, Lily, hummed a tuneless little melody, her small face illuminated by the intermittent glow of passing streetlights. His world was one of towering glass, of silent boardrooms where fortunes were made or lost on the strength of a whispered word. It was a world of sterile precision, of schedules kept to the minute and emotions kept under lock and key. It had been this way for 3 years, ever since Catherine, ever since the silence had descended upon his sprawling, empty house. The house was no longer a home. It was a museum of a life that was no longer his. He had left a meeting with Japanese investors mid-sentence. His second-in-command, a man paid a king's ransom to anticipate his needs, had blinked in momentary shock. But the clock on the wall had struck 3, and nothing, not even a multi-billion-dollar merger, was more important than picking up Lily from school. It was the one ritual that tethered him to the earth, the one part of his day that felt real. "Daddy, it's raining so hard," Lily said, her little voice cutting through the monotonous hum of the engine. "It is, sweet pea," he answered, his eyes scanning the road. He was a creature of routine, and this deluge was an unwelcome disruption. That was when he saw it. A beat-up old hatchback, hazard lights blinking in a frantic, desperate rhythm, was stalled at the side of the road, its nose pointed awkwardly toward the curb. A lone figure stood beside it, drenched and looking utterly defeated. The woman's shoulders were slumped, her hair plastered to her face by the relentless downpour. Other cars swished past her, their occupants cocooned in warmth and indifference. He would have done the same. He would have driven past. His schedule was tight. Lily was in the car. It was not his problem. The logic was cold and efficient, the very same logic he applied to his business empire. "That lady looks sad," Lily murmured from the back. "Her car is broken." Arthur's gaze met the woman's in the rearview mirror for a fleeting second. He saw not just frustration, but a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. It was a look he recognized, a quiet desperation that wealth could insulate one from, but never truly extinguish. For a moment, she wasn't just a stranger, she was a symbol of every struggle the world held outside his tinted windows. "Daddy, can we help her?" The question was so simple, so pure. It sliced through the layers of detachment he had so carefully constructed around his heart. Helping was inefficient. It was messy. It was human. It was something Catherine would have done without a second thought. The memory struck him like a physical blow, a ghost of warmth in the icy car. He slowed the vehicle, pulling over a safe distance ahead of the stalled car. He turned, looking at his daughter, at her wide, hopeful eyes. In her, he saw Catherine's spirit, an untarnished empathy he was terrified of crushing. "Stay here and lock the doors, okay, sweet pea? I'll be right back." He shrugged off his $1,000 suit jacket, tossing it onto the passenger seat. The cold air hit him the moment he opened the door, a shocking, wet slap. The rain was merciless, soaking his expensive shirt and trousers in seconds. He felt the chill seep into his bones as he walked toward the woman, each step an act of defiance against the man he had become. The woman, Elara, watched the expensive car pull over with a sense of dread. She expected a rebuke, a complaint about her blocking the road. When the man got out, tall and broad-shouldered in a shirt that was now becoming transparent in the downpour, she braced herself. But his face held no anger. It held something else. A quiet resolve. "Having some trouble?" he asked, his voice calm over the din of the storm. She nodded, unable to find her voice for a moment. "It just died. I think it might be the battery, or maybe the alternator." To be honest, it could be anything. A humorless laugh escaped her lips. "She's a bit of a classic. Let's see if we can get it out of traffic," he suggested, already moving toward the back of the car. If you put it in neutral, I can push it to that side street. Elara stared at him. This man, who looked like he belonged on the cover of a business magazine, was offering to push her rust bucket of a car in a hurricane. She was so accustomed to being invisible, to struggling in silence, that the simple, unprompted offer of help felt like a seismic event. "Are you sure?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly from the cold. "You're getting soaked." "I'll dry," he said with a small, almost rusty smile. "Just steer." She scrambled back into the driver's seat, her numb fingers fumbling with the gearshift. She watched in the rearview mirror as he placed his hands on the trunk, his powerful frame braced against the vehicle. He gave a grunt of effort, and slowly, miraculously, the car began to move. She steered it carefully into a small, empty parking spot on the quieter side street, the motion feeling unnaturally smooth. She put the car in park and killed the pathetic blinking of the hazard lights. Silence descended, broken only by the drumming of the rain on the roof. He came to her window, his dark hair slicked to his forehead, rain dripping from his chin. He didn't seem to notice or care. "You should be safer here for now." Elara felt a wave of gratitude so profound it almost brought her to tears. It wasn't just about the car. It was about being seen. About a hand reaching out in the middle of her own private storm. "Thank you," she said, the words feeling utterly inadequate. "Truly. Let me at least give you something to dry off with. I have an old towel in the trunk." "You don't have to do that." "Please," she insisted, already opening her door. "It's the least I can do." She walked to the back of the car, fumbling with the key to open the trunk. The lock was sticky, as always. Arthur stood beside her, a quiet, dripping presence. Finally, the trunk popped open with a groan. The trunk was a jumble of her life, a bag of groceries, a few scattered art supplies, a worn blanket. And leaning against the side, wrapped in a protective plastic sheet, was a canvas. A large, nearly finished painting. Elara reached for the towel, but Arthur wasn't looking at it. His eyes were fixed on the painting. All the color drained from his face, replaced by a stark, shocking pallor. He looked as if he had seen a ghost. He took a half step forward, his hand hovering in the air as if he wanted to touch it but was afraid to. The rain continued to fall, but for him, the world had stopped. The city noise, the cold, the presence of the woman beside him, it all faded into a deafening roar in his ears. He knew that painting. It was a lighthouse. A solitary, defiant lighthouse standing against a tumultuous, churning sea of blues and grays. The sky was a masterpiece of controlled chaos, streaks of pale yellow light breaking through the oppressive darkness of the storm clouds. It wasn't just any lighthouse, it was the one they had visited on their honeymoon. And it wasn't just any painting, it was a perfect, brushstroke for brushstroke replica of the last piece of art Catherine had ever created. The one that sat unfinished on an easel in her locked studio, a room he hadn't entered in 3 years. "Where," he began, his voice a choked, unfamiliar rasp. "Where did you get that?" Elara looked from his stunned face to her painting, confused. I painted it. It's a commission." "Well, hopefully. It's for a gallery submission." He shook his head slowly, a deep, primal disbelief warring with the evidence before his eyes. "No. You couldn't have. That style, the way the light hits the waves, it's—" He fell silent, unable to articulate the storm of emotion breaking inside him. It was a feeling he thought had been buried with his wife, a raw, staggering sense of wonder mixed with an almost unbearable ache of loss. This woman, this stranger in the rain, had somehow, impossibly, reached into the most sacred, sealed-off part of his past. The wall he had built around his heart, brick by painful brick, had just been breached. Not by a bulldozer, but by a simple canvas in the trunk of a broken-down car. He looked at her then, truly looked at her. At her weathered face, her hands smudged with what he now realized was paint, her eyes wide with a mixture of concern and bewilderment. In that moment, under the weeping gray sky, Arthur Vance knew that his life, so carefully controlled and numbingly predictable, had just been irrevocably, terrifyingly, and perhaps wonderfully, altered. The simple act of kindness was over. What began now was something far more complex. "I need to know more about this painting," he said, the words heavy with a significance she could not yet understand. "My name is Arthur. Please, can we talk?" He offered her a ride home, an offer she was too bewildered to refuse. He called a private towing service he had on retainer, instructing them to take her car to the best mechanic in the city and to handle the bill. He did it with a quiet efficiency that spoke of immense resources, a fact that was not lost on Elara. In his car, with the gentle warmth of the heater and the soft leather seats, she felt as if she had stepped into another dimension. His daughter, Lily, peeked at her from the back seat with curious eyes. "You got very wet, Daddy," Lily observed. "Yes, I did," Arthur replied, his gaze still distant, still processing the shock. Elara lived in a small, third-floor walk-up in a neighborhood that time seemed to have forgotten. The building had a sort of weary charm, but the peeling paint and drafty windows told a story of constant struggle. He insisted on carrying the painting for her, handling it with a reverence that she found both touching and deeply strange. Inside, her apartment was a testament to her life. It was one large room, a combination of living space and art studio. Canvases in various stages of completion were stacked against the walls. The air smelled of turpentine and coffee. It was cluttered and chaotic, but it was alive. It was the polar opposite of his own pristine, silent mansion. It felt more like a home than his own house had in years. He placed the painting on a spare easel and stood before it, his hands clenched at his sides. Lily, sensing the shift in her father's mood, stayed quietly by his side, her small hand finding his. "My wife, she was a painter," Arthur began, his voice low and thick with unshed grief. "She passed away 3 years ago. This painting, it's almost identical to the last one she ever worked on. The subject, the style, even the brushwork. It's impossible. But it's right here." Elara sank onto a stool, her legs suddenly weak. The pieces started to click into place, his shock, his reverence. "I'm so sorry for your loss," she said softly. "I don't know what to say. I've been developing this style for years. The lighthouse, it's a recurring image in my work. A symbol of hope in the storm. I saw a photograph of it once in an old travel magazine and it just stuck with me." He turned from the painting to look at her, his eyes searching hers, looking for something he couldn't name. She used to say the exact same thing. A little bit of light against all that darkness. A heavy silence filled the room, thick with shared sorrow and uncanny connection. Here were two strangers, their lives colliding in the most improbable way, bound by a ghost and a canvas. In the days that followed, Arthur couldn't get Elara or her painting out of his mind. The hollow space in his chest, once a familiar companion, now felt like an active, aching void. He had his assistant, a discreet and loyal man named George, look into her. The report he received painted a picture of quiet dignity in the face of relentless hardship. Elara was a brilliant artist who had never caught a break, selling pieces at local fairs and barely making enough to cover rent and supplies. She was known for her kindness, often donating small works to community fundraisers. She was entirely alone, with no family to speak of. She was, in every sense, the architect of her own solitary life. The knowledge deepened his sense of responsibility, his fascination. He found himself manufacturing reasons to see her. He called to check on her car, which was now fully repaired. He commissioned her, officially, to finish the lighthouse piece, offering a sum that made her gasp. He insisted it wasn't charity, it was an investment in a talent he believed in. He started bringing Lily with him on his visits to her studio. The little girl, who was often quiet and withdrawn around strangers, blossomed in Alara's presence. She was enchanted by the colors, the smells, and Alara's gentle patience. Alara would give her a small brush and some paper, and Lily would sit for hours, happily painting swirls and suns while the two adults talked. In that small, paint-scented room, Arthur felt the rigid armor around him begin to crack. He spoke of Catherine, not with the choked grief of before, but with a quiet, reminiscent fondness. He shared stories of her laughter, her passion, her unfulfilled dreams of one day having her art seen. Alara, in turn, spoke of her own life, of the loneliness and the fierce, burning need to create that kept her going. She saw past the billionaire CEO. She saw a grieving husband and a devoted father. She saw the profound sadness in his eyes that no amount of money could erase. He, in turn, saw not a charity case, but a woman of immense strength and unwavering integrity. He saw the warmth of her spirit, a light that reminded him so much of the one he had lost, yet was uniquely, beautifully her own. One sunny Saturday afternoon, he found her not in her studio, but volunteering at a local soup kitchen. He had brought Lily for a visit, only to find a note on her door. On a hunch, he had driven to the community center downtown. He watched from a distance as she moved among the city's forgotten, offering not just food, but a warm smile and a kind word. There was a quiet dignity to her actions that humbled him. He walked in, Lily's hand in his. Alara looked up, surprised, a ladle in her hand. A slow smile spread across her face, a genuine, unguarded expression of warmth that made his heart skip a beat. "You found me," she said. "I did," he replied. "Can we help?" That afternoon, Arthur Vance, CEO of a global tech empire, stood side by side with Alara, serving stew to homeless men and women. He listened to their stories. He looked them in the eye. For the first time in years, he felt a connection to the world outside his gilded cage. He saw his daughter watching him, her face full of pride. And he felt a flicker of something he thought was gone forever. He was beginning to heal. The quiet blossoming of their connection was too pure to last in the harsh glare of Arthur's world. The first tremor came in the form of a single photograph, published on a notorious gossip website. It was a long-lens shot of Arthur, Lily, and Alara leaving a small, unassuming park, an ice cream cone in each of their hands. They were laughing. The headline was cruel and dismissive: "Billionaire widower Arthur Vance finds new muse. Is she an artist or a gold digger?" The storm that followed was immediate and brutal. The story was picked up by mainstream news outlets, each one adding its own speculative, salacious spin. Reporters appeared outside Alara's apartment building, ambushing her when she tried to take out her trash. They shouted questions, their cameras flashing like weapons. They portrayed her as a calculating opportunist who had preyed on a grieving man's vulnerability. Her art was dismissed as a mere prop in her elaborate scheme. Her world, once small and private, was shattered. Her landlord, smelling a scandal, suddenly found a dozen fictitious violations of her lease and threatened eviction. The local gallery that had shown mild interest in her work suddenly stopped returning her calls. The quiet respect she had earned in her community evaporated overnight, replaced by whispers and suspicious stares. Alara felt as if her very soul was being stripped bare and held up for public ridicule. The warmth and gentle hope that had begun to bloom in her heart withered under the relentless, ugly spotlight. She felt tainted, her integrity questioned, her art profaned. The worst part was the fear. Not for herself, but for Lily. She had grown to love the little girl, and the thought that this scandal was now attached to her, that her classmates might hear the whispers, was unbearable. Arthur was furious. He unleashed his legal team, who issued threats and cease and desist orders, but it was like trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. The narrative was set. He tried to shield Alara, sending a private security detail to keep the press at bay, but it only seemed to confirm the story in the public's mind. The presence of his wealth, once a tool, now felt like a curse. He went to her apartment, slipping past the ghouls of the press. He found her inside, surrounded by packing boxes. The light in her eyes, the very thing that had drawn him to her, was gone. It had been replaced by a haunted, wounded look. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice raw. "I'm leaving, Arthur," she said, her own voice flat, devoid of emotion. "I can't do this. I can't live like this. They're making me into something I'm not." "We can fight this," he insisted, stepping closer. "Don't let them win." She finally looked at him, and he saw the profound pain she was in. "This is your world, Arthur, not mine. The noise, the judgment, the cruelty, it's the air you breathe. But it's poison to me. They're not just attacking me, they're attacking my art, my spirit, the only things I've ever truly had. And they're hurting Lily. I won't be the reason that little girl's life becomes a public spectacle." The words were a blade to his heart. He saw the truth in them. His world was toxic. He had carelessly dragged her into it, and now she was paying the price. "Don't do this, Elara," he pleaded, his voice breaking. "Please. You brought the light back. For me. For Lily. And your world put it out," she whispered, a single tear tracing a path down her cheek. "I have to go. It's the only way to protect what's left of myself. I have to. Goodbye, Arthur." She turned away from him, a gesture of finality that was more painful than any shout. The wall was back up, but this time, it was hers. And he was the one on the outside. He walked out of her apartment, the scent of turpentine and the ghost of her warmth replaced by the cold, sterile air of the hallway. He felt the familiar hollowness return to his chest, but it was 1,000 times worse now. Before, it had been a numb absence. Now, it was an active, throbbing wound, a visceral knowledge of what he had just lost. He had found a light in the storm, only to watch his own world create a hurricane that extinguished it. He was alone again, and the silence had never been louder. The days after Elara's departure were a descent into a familiar gray fog. Arthur went through the motions of his life with the precision of an automaton. He chaired meetings, signed documents, and managed his empire, but the core of him was absent. The brief, brilliant period of color and warmth had made the return to monochrome unbearable. He saw the change in Lily, too. Her humming had stopped. She would ask about Elara in a small, hopeful voice that broke his heart. "Is Elara coming to paint with us today, Daddy?" He would have to explain, gently, that Elara had needed to go away for a while, an answer that satisfied neither of them. One evening, he finally did what he hadn't done in 3 years. He unlocked the door to Catherine's studio. The air inside was still and thick with the scent of dried paint and memory. Dust motes danced in the single beam of moonlight slanting through the window. And there it was, on the easel. Her lighthouse. Unfinished. Hopeful. A monument to a life cut short. He stood there for a long time, comparing it in his mind's eye to Elara's version. They were impossibly similar in technique, but different in spirit. Catherine's was full of a bright, joyful yearning. Elara's held a deeper, more weathered resilience, the hope of a survivor. They were two sides of the same beautiful coin. Two lights against the darkness. In that moment, something inside him shifted. It was a crack in the ice of his grief and despair. It was the birth of a cold, clear rage. Not at Elara, but at the world that had hounded her. At the soulless machine of gossip and innuendo that chewed up good people for entertainment. He had built an empire with logic and control. He had used his power to acquire wealth. But what was the point of all that power if he couldn't use it to protect the people he loved? What was the point of owning the world if he allowed its ugliest parts to destroy the only thing that made it beautiful? He would not let them win. He would not let her memory be a lie. His grand gesture would not be one of money. It would be an act of radical, public vulnerability. The annual Vance Foundation Charity Gala was the pinnacle of the city's social calendar. It was an event he usually endured, a performance of philanthropy he carried out with detached professionalism. This year, it would be different. This year, he had something to say. He took the stage, the ballroom falling into a hushed, expectant silence. Hundreds of the city's wealthiest and most influential people watched him, their diamonds glittering under the glow of the chandeliers. The press was there in full force, their cameras poised. He set aside the prepared remarks on the podium. "Good evening," he began, his voice steady, amplified throughout the grand hall. "Tonight, we are here to raise money for a good cause. But I find myself needing to speak about a different kind of poverty. A poverty of spirit. A poverty of kindness." A murmur went through the crowd. This was not the standard, sanitized speech they expected. "As many of you have read," he continued, his eyes scanning the room, "I have recently had the privilege of getting to know a woman named Elara. She has been described in the press as many things. A gold digger. An opportunist. These are lies. And tonight, I want to tell you the truth." He spoke of the rain, the stalled car, and the simple act of pushing it to safety. He described the moment she opened her trunk, and the shock of seeing the painting. He told them, his voice thick with emotion, about his late wife, Catherine, and her own art. "The woman the world has tried to villainize did something extraordinary," he said, his voice ringing with conviction. "Without knowing who I was, without any hope of reward, she created a piece of art that was a mirror of my wife's soul. She created a beacon of light that found me in the dark. She did it through her own talent, her own spirit, her own quiet resilience." He looked directly into the lens of a television camera. He was no longer speaking to the room, but to an audience of one, wherever she might be. "Elara didn't come into my life seeking wealth or fame. She came into my life and my daughter's life and showed us how to feel again. She reminded me that true value isn't measured in stock prices or market shares. It's measured in acts of kindness. In shared moments of creativity. In the courage it takes to keep a light shining, even in the middle of a storm." He paused, taking a deep, ragged breath. He was laying his heart bare for the world to see, and he felt not weak, but powerful. "I failed to protect her from the cruelty of my world. I let the noise and the lies drive her away. That is a failure I will regret for the rest of my life. But I will not allow those lies to stand as the final word. Elara is a woman of profound integrity, immense talent, and the deepest kindness I have ever known. She is not a gold digger. She is the gold. She is the hope. And I love her." He finished his speech and walked off the stage, leaving behind a room stunned into absolute silence. He ignored the frantic whispers, the shocked faces. He had done what he needed to do. In a small, rented room in a town hundreds of miles away, Elara watched the speech on a small television, her hand pressed to her mouth. A friend, worried about her, had called and told her to turn it on. Every word Arthur spoke dismantled the walls she had built around her heart. He wasn't defending himself, he was defending her. He wasn't using his power, he was using his truth. He was showing her the man she had seen glimpses of, the grieving, gentle, honorable man hidden beneath the billionaire. Tears streamed down her face, tears of vindication, of sorrow, and of a powerful, overwhelming love. He found her 2 days later. He hadn't used investigators. He had simply started with the places known for their art communities, for their quiet, unassuming beauty. He found her sketching by a peaceful lake, the very picture of the solitude she had sought. She saw him approaching and stood, her heart pounding. He stopped a few feet from her, his face etched with a desperate hope. "I meant every word," he said simply. "I know," she whispered. "I don't want to live in a world without you and your light, Elara," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "But I won't ask you to live in mine either. So let's build a new one. Together." A world where art matters more than acquisitions, and kindness is the only currency. Just tell me what that world looks like. She looked into his eyes and saw her future. She saw a life not of gilded cages or public scrutiny, but of shared purpose. She saw Lily's smiling face. She saw a home filled with love and paint and laughter. She closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around his neck. "It looks like this," she said. "It just looks like this." He held her, breathing in the scent of her hair, feeling the solid, real warmth of her in his arms. The hollow place in his chest was gone, filled to bursting. The storm had passed. They were the lighthouse, and they were home. 1 year later. The world Arthur and Elara built together was quieter than his old one, and richer than she could have ever imagined. Arthur had stepped down as CEO of his company, taking a role as chairman of the board. It gave him time. Time for what mattered. They didn't live in his sterile mansion. They had found a beautiful, rambling house in the country with a converted barn that now served as Elara's magnificent, light-filled studio. It was also the headquarters of their new venture, the Catherine Vance Foundation, an organization dedicated to providing grants and studio space to struggling artists who possessed talent but lacked opportunity. The lighthouse painting, Elara's finished masterpiece, hung in the main hall of their home. Beside it, now framed and preserved, was Catherine's unfinished original. They were not a shrine to a ghost, but a testament to a journey. A story of two souls, connected by art, healed by love. The press had, for the most part, moved on. Arthur's public, heartfelt defense of Elara had shifted the narrative completely. They were no longer a scandal, they were a love story. This afternoon, sunlight streamed through the large barn windows. Elara was at her easel, but she wasn't painting. She was watching Lily, who now had her own small easel, meticulously painting a bright, cheerful-looking sun. Arthur came in, not in a suit, but in jeans and a soft sweater. He carried a tray with 3 mugs of hot chocolate. He didn't speak, not wanting to break the peaceful spell. He simply set the tray down and came to stand behind Elara, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. She leaned back against him, her hand covering his. They stood there together, watching their daughter create. The air was filled with the smell of paint, the warmth of the sun, and the quiet hum of a happy child. It was a perfect, simple moment. "You know," Elara whispered, "I think Catherine would have liked this." Arthur tightened his embrace, a feeling of profound, unshakable peace settling in his chest. He looked from his daughter to the woman he loved, to the art that surrounded them, a vibrant tapestry of their new life. "I know she would," he replied, his voice soft. "She would have loved the light."